I want to share with you this morning the second of this mini-series that I made up, which was, we're in a gap. We finished the series on Jude, and next week at 1, we're starting a brand new series. Rousseau is going to preach the first about being one and what one means all across the Bible. But in these 2 weeks, I felt moved to just talk a little bit about what it means to try and please Jesus, to live to please Jesus. And last week we talked about the 10 lepers and the one who came back with a gratitude attitude. Do you remember that? Yeah. And any people had gratitude attitude this week? Yeah. We had gratitude attitude in our life group. It was great. And that's a good way of living a life of praise. And the second one I want to talk about is a famous passage in Matthew 16. So if you've got your Bible, please turn to Matthew 16. And this is the story of Peter's declaration of Jesus, which many of you will know. And we're just going to read from verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." But Jesus said, "What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." It's an amazing moment, isn't it? An amazing moment in Jesus' ministry. And we've heard it many times. And I wonder if we've really understood what was going on here, because Jesus chose this place, Caesarea Philippi. And Jesus didn't spend much time there. This was actually quite a way north of the Lake of Galilee. And Jesus went up to Tyre and Sidon. And this place, Caesarea Philippi, was a strange city quite a way north of Galilee. And I believe, as I hopefully can share with you this morning, that Jesus chose that place deliberately for this encounter with Peter. The reason was because he wanted to ask this question. He wanted to ask this question. Well, why was the place significant? Well, this town or city, whatever it was, had been rebuilt and enlarged by Philip. Now, Philip was the son of Herod the Great, and that's why it was called Philippi. And it was called Caesarea because he did it in honor of the emperor Tiberius. So this city had been built and named in honor of the emperor of Rome, Tiberius, and also in honor of Philip himself, Philippi, so Caesarea Philippi. So this very place was already a center of idolatry, idolizing. Many called the emperor a god, and indeed in Rome he was regarded as a god, the emperor. So here was this place, but not only that, it was formerly called Paneas. And it was called Paneas because it was the center of the worship of the Greek god Pan, who was the god of nature. And there was temples there for the worship of Pan, where there was temple prostitution, and it had become the center of paganism as well. So you see, this city was idolatrously named, and the things that were going on were the worshipping of idols and gods and some very unholy practices there. So I think it's significant that Jesus chose this place as the place to address the question of his deity, of his godness. You see that? It's actually, he asked this question next to this huge, or in the vicinity of this huge marble temple that had been built in honor of Caesar Augustus. So when Jesus said to the disciples, "Who do you say I am?" we might look back and think, well, it's an obvious question, isn't it? It's a question that they must have known he was the Messiah. But it wasn't an obvious question. it was far from an obvious question, because not only was this location a question, but think about it. Think about it. Jesus was asking these group of Jews, who do you say I am? Now, think in terms of Israel's understanding of who God was. The Israelites and the Jews, their experience of God was Moses bringing them out of slavery and God parting the Red Sea and drowning the Egyptian army. Their experience of God was he was so holy that when Moses went up the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, he came down and his face was glowing because he'd encountered the very face, the glory of God. And they couldn't even touch the mountain in case they were killed. And they weren't even able to say the name of God. The name of God was unutterable to them. They couldn't actually say it. And when the priests went into the Holy of Holies, you've heard this story before, they had to tie a rope around the priest as he went into the Holy of Holies, the very presence of God in the center of the temple, because if he wasn't purified properly, he could die. And the only way they could get him out without dying themselves was pulling on the rope to drag him out. You see, their experience of God and their understanding of God was this almighty being who was so holy that even going into his presence impure could risk death. You see that? And even touching the Ark of the Covenant. You remember Uzzah in Samuel? He touched the Ark of the Covenant when it rocked on the big, and he died. He died. This was Israel's understanding of who God was. So perhaps it's not surprising when Jesus said, "Who do the people say I am?" that they said, "Oh, you're a prophet." Because Elijah had done miracles, and it fitted. But the sheer concept that this could be that God in flesh, in the form of a carpenter from Nazareth, you see how far from their understanding that was. And that's why when Peter said, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God," he was saying, you in the flesh are God. And I believe that's why Jesus said, "There's no way, Peter, you could have understood that unless my Father in heaven had revealed that to you." See, my friend Brian, he's a plumber. Now, if I brought Brian up and said, "He's the Son of God," you would find that hard to understand, wouldn't you? Even if he'd done some miracles. But that's what Jesus was asking of them. Who do you say I am? You're the Messiah. Isaiah 53 verse 2 actually says, there was nothing physically attractive. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing is in his appearance that we should desire him. Yet Peter, in that moment, gets it. It's so profound, isn't it? It's so profound. And after Peter does correctly get it, Jesus' ministry changes. He goes in a different direction. He takes a different route, because Matthew 16:21 says this: From that moment on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples, so instead of talking to the whole crowd, now he's talking to his disciples, that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. You see, in that moment of declaration of Peter's, suddenly Jesus was able on that confession to change tack. And now he was teaching them about what the Messiah must go through, which was totally alien to what they were expecting the Messiah to do. Because the people thought he was a prophet. If he was the Messiah, then he was going to be a military ruler, a man of military might, who was going to lead a rebellion, who was going to take the nation of Israel back to the kingdom as it was under David, and the rule and the reign of God was going to come in physical form, and it was going to be the Messiah that was leading them to that. How opposite was that to the fact that Jesus was saying, no, I've got to be killed. I've got to suffer. I've got to be abused. And then after 3 days, I'm going to come back to life. That is so alien. You see, in this whole moment, it's such an alien thing, an alien concept. The Jews were expecting a national restoration. And what then happens is Jesus goes and he raises Lazarus from the dead. And the word starts to spread. This guy has raised a dead man, and we've all seen it. We were witnessing to it. And momentum begins to build. They say, wow, no way. And then as Jesus comes into Jerusalem on the donkey, they're all waving their palms and cheering, say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord, because they believe a military uprising is about to happen. And then after all that, ultimately Jesus is arrested, and you see all those hopes come crashing down. And in fact, Paul talks about that Jesus is a stumbling block to the Jews in 1 Corinthians. And the Messiah is a stumbling block because in the Old Testament, anyone who was crucified or put on a pole, it says, was a murderer and was cursed by God. So Jesus going onto the cross was a stumbling block. It was not what they were expecting. A suffering Messiah was so alien. Am I making some sense here? You're very quiet. Is that because I'm shocking you, or you're listening? Yeah. But you see, in this moment of identity, this confession from Peter, something really significant is happening. Firstly, as I say, it's come from the Father that Peter has had this revelation. And now Jesus feels on the back of that confession, he can begin to teach about what the Messiah must truly suffer. And ultimately, we'll see, obviously the disciples look back on these moments. They might not have understood it, but they did understand it when Jesus came back to life again. And it strengthened them. And so what Jesus does is now in this passage, and we move on to verse 24, he now begins to prepare the disciples for how they must respond and how they must follow Jesus. And he begins to prepare us. And as we read what Jesus said to his disciples, I want us to read it in light of what he's saying to us, and what it means to follow him in light of this confession of who the true Messiah is. So verse 24, and I've actually chose the Amplified version, which I like. It says, then Jesus said to his disciples, so now you know I'm the Messiah. Now I've told you that I must suffer. Now he says to his disciples, if anyone wishes to follow me as my disciple, he must deny himself. He must set aside whatever may come and follow me, believing in me, conforming to my example in living, and if need be, suffering, or perhaps dying because of faith in me. Expressing a willingness to endure whatever may come. And is that not, we talk about how everything Jesus was saying about himself was alien to the general understanding. Is that concept of suffering and going through whatever we must endure, is that not a bit alien to what generally we hear about following Christ? And then you see after the resurrection, the disciples saw. When Jesus was killed, Peter he must have thought everything was lost. He went back fishing, didn't he? He thought everything was lost. It was understandable. But then he meets the risen Jesus. And what we see in the disciples is such a transformation that now, this verse that I've just read you, that is how they're willing to live. They will die for Jesus. In fact, most of them did die for Jesus. Now they understand what Jesus was saying is, whatever may come, you've got to endure, because what I have given you is good news for the nations. I'm the risen Son of God. And there's a lasting salvation that goes into eternity that people can have. And the disciples now were unshakable in their boldness. I'm going to show you a little clip. I love the movie Risen. Have you seen the movie Risen? And in the movie Risen, there's a scene here where they go and after the resurrection and the disciples have been with Jesus, the centurion who's doing the investigating, he goes and they grab Bartholomew, who's one of the disciples. It's made up, but it's kind of nice. And he interrogates him, and he tells him what Jesus has been through. But you see how transformed Bartholomew is, because the centurion says to him, you ran away, didn't you? And he said, yes, I did. And he tells him all about the crucifixion, But then he tries to say to him, now I want you to betray the other disciples. And just watch this 1 minute clip.
Where are the other disciples? I will not ask again. Tell me, and you're free. Give your word. My word. Where are they? There. Everywhere.
They're everywhere. I love that. He says to him, where are the disciples? And then you can go free. They're everywhere. Bye. There's an unshakable foundation in his faith now because he knows that everything that Jesus promised them has come to pass. And now they're going to take the gospel, and whatever comes, it doesn't matter. You know, they realized that they weren't promised fame. They weren't promised riches. They weren't promised an easy life. They weren't promised that they were going to be treated like conquering heroes. Hey, you were the guys with Jesus, weren't you? Come on, let me put you on your platform. No. He promised them that they must follow him, maybe even to death. And whatever it takes, they must follow him. And I'm sure they remembered his teaching, but they were now so rooted in the truth of who he was that it didn't matter. And we read, if you read Scripture in light of this, applying not only to them but to us, it has a different look. Just look at these verses that I've called out. Matthew 10:38, Jesus said this, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Not worthy of me. Matthew 8:22, but Jesus told him, this is the man who wanted to follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. He was saying his father probably wasn't actually dead, but he wanted to wait around to make sure he got the inheritance. And he said, no, you can't afford to wait. You've got to follow me. Matthew 10:22, this is just mind-blowing, really. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. John 15:20-21. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way, not because of who you are, but because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. Isn't this sobering? You know, sometimes we wonder why we're unpopular. Well, perhaps it's because of Jesus. You know, and perhaps we're enduring whatever may come because we want to stand firm to the end. Who do you say I am? That's the question. You know, there was a lot of mistaken identity going on as to who Jesus was. And there's mistaken identity today, I believe. We're sometimes in danger of incorrectly answering the same question. Who do you say I am? You know, sometimes we may be saying he's a good man. Jesus is a good man. Or a miracle worker. Or an entertainer. Or someone to meet our needs. A God to serve our needs and fit our image of him. David Wells, the theologian, the author, who wrote the book No Place for Truth, he writes this: we have turned to a God that we can use rather than to a God we must obey. We have turned to a God who will fulfill our needs rather than to a God before whom we must surrender our rights. You know, sometimes we're following versions of Jesus that are made up by men. Tozer again, A.W. Tozer, some of you will know his writings. He listed some examples. He said, there is the romantic Christ, the sentimental Christ, the philosophical Christ of the academic egghead, the cozy Christ, and the muscular Christ of the all-American halfback. You know, sometimes we're inventing Jesuses that don't exist, and we're following them, rather than the Jesus that said, you know, you're going to be hated because of me, but stand firm to the end. John, the disciple who was actually with Jesus, obviously, and heard this teaching, he warned in his letter, 1 John 5:21. He said, this Jesus is both true God and real life. Dear children, be on guard against all clever facsimiles or copies. You know, facsimile is a copy. He's saying, be on guard against anyone who tells you that following Jesus is a nice, cozy experience and it's all about making you comfortable. You know, perhaps some mistaken identities we have is what I call social worker Jesus. Forgive me. The social workers, I love social workers. But a social worker Jesus is, you know, we have this concept that we're going to give him our all when our problems are fixed. Or when our struggles are met, you know, when we've had all our struggles fixed, then we're going to run after Jesus. I don't see that in what Jesus was teaching his disciples, do you? It was through. I say it later, I think the blessing of God comes in the despite, not the because. We ran despite going through tough times. You know, we should help people, and that's what the church is partly about, but it's not a basis for our faith. It's a consequence of our faith. The basis of our faith is we'll do whatever comes, and we'll endure whatever comes. What about vending machine Jesus? Vending machine Jesus is, you know, you put something in and you expect something out. You know, if I give faithfully into the church, then I need something back, Jesus. You know, or you know, if I give something and then I don't get a proper thank you, I allow that to create an offense inside me. Well, I don't think that's what Jesus is about. You know, whatever may come, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. I'm going to live thankfully for you. I'm going to give my life whether the vending machine pops out chocolate bars or not. And oftentimes it doesn't. But Jesus does see that. Or what about best friend forever Jesus, BFF Jesus? Just wants you to be happy. Jesus just wants you to be happy, doesn't he? He wants you to live however you want. As long as it makes you happy, then that's what Jesus wants for you. Well, I don't see that. Do you see that? I want to live like this. You know, Jesus doesn't mind that I go clubbing on a Saturday night because it makes me feel good. I don't see a BFF Jesus. I see a Jesus that demands holiness of us. Purity. You know, we heard it so powerfully prophetically this morning. He wants a spotless bride, not a compromised bride. And then, I mean, I could go on, but, you know, maybe there's parents Jesus, and my parents are here, so forgive me, Mum and Dad. But, you know, a parents Jesus is we check in every now and again, make sure everything's all right. Maybe on our birthdays or whatever. But Jesus asks of a devotion that is living for him daily. In whatever we do, we're serving him. It's not checking in once a week. Yeah, that's right. And I fear, guys, I do fear, and I don't say it critically, but I fear that sometimes Christians are choosing churches based on what suits them. You know, I've heard of situations where as people draw up in the car park, they ask who's preaching that day, and then make their decision on whether they're going to stay based on who the preacher is. You know, or is the worship there good? Do they play the type of music that I like to enjoy? You know, do they meet at a convenient time? You know, Christianity is a challenging thing. It's a challenging, to follow Jesus is not a comfortable thing at times. And we have to be ready to endure what Jesus said we would have to endure, you know, denying ourselves, setting aside our selfish interests, enduring whatever may come, and following him, conforming to his example. Whatever our circumstances, We need to confess the right identity of Jesus. Who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? Well, if you're saying I'm the Messiah and the Son of the living God, then you have to conform to my example. But the good thing is that Jesus also, in this moment with Peter, says something else amazing, doesn't he? He says, upon this confession, I'm going to build my church. And not even the gates of hell are going to prevail against it. So I may be going through some tough times or whatever, but not even the gates of hell are going to defeat me. Who do you say I am? Well, if you confess, then blessed are you. Blessed are you, Peter, he said. Not even the gates of hell are going to come against you. And if I can say one thing to us today is, keep going, guys. Keep going. Keep running. Keep pursuing Jesus, because there are rewards for those who run to the end. This difficult time we're in is a temporary thing. Ultimately, we are going to be rewarded. Listen to this. James wrote this in James 1:12. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. And the crown of life was like the laurel crown for the winning athletes in the races. So it was for those that were victorious in the Olympics or whatever the equivalent was. And they received the crown of life. And the promise of God is if that you keep running and you see it to the end. If you read the letters that Jesus sent to the churches in Revelation, to he that overcomes, there'll be victory. He that is victorious, he that overcomes, he that runs to the end, the crown of life. Keep going, guys. It may feel that you're going uphill at the moment, but others are with you, holding you and cheering you on. I was sharing with the guys earlier that yesterday we did the park run, and there was a steep hill, and I was thinking of giving up because I'd run the race so badly. But there were marshals there saying, come on, you're doing great. I wasn't, but they were saying, come on, you're doing great. And that's what all of heaven is saying. Come on, guys, keep running, keep running. There's a host of heaven. 1 Peter 4:13 says this, be glad for the chance to suffer as Christ suffered. It will prepare you for even greater happiness when he makes his glorious return. Are you prepared for even greater happiness when he makes his glorious return? Thing is, when we're in these difficult moments, if you're in a difficult moment at the moment, then, when we suffer, there's something amazing happens. We actually become closer to Christ because he suffered. We become a partaker in the blessing. We're kind of joined to him in that suffering. So when Peter says, be glad for the chance to suffer as Christ suffered, if we persevere, we continue to run in those difficult times, then we are overcomers in Christ. An amazing reward happens. Perhaps, Becky, you can come and just play for me now. Luke 12:37. There is great reward for those who are found ready. So if we are running, if we are pursuing Jesus, if we are giving our all, then if we're found ready in that moment, there is a great reward. These words are incredible, I think. Jesus telling the parable, he says this, it will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes, finds them ready when he comes. Truly I tell you, he, as in the master, will dress himself to serve and will make them recline at the table and will come and wait on them. Can you see the picture that Jesus is giving here? Is that if we are ready when he comes and we're running for him and we're pursuing him, then this picture is of the master himself dressing himself to serve, inviting you to recline and serving you. Isn't that an amazing concept? That Jesus is saying, if you can run to the end and you persevere, then the master himself is going to dress to serve you. Run your race for Jesus, guys. Luke 6:38. give away your life. This is the Message interpretation. You'll find life given back, but not merely given back with bonus and blessing. Who do you say he is today? Are you ready to run for him? Why don't we stand together? I'm going to ask us to respond here. I had a friend who died on Thursday, the 13th of August, 2015, or someone I knew, 2 days before his 90th birthday, a guy called Morris Rowlandson. Now, you won't have heard of Morris. Has anyone heard of Morris? Carol has, because she was with me. She's the only one. But this is what it said about Morris on the Evangelical Alliance statement when he died. It said he was a key figure in British evangelism for more than 60 years. And he was used by God to organize some of the greatest gospel missions the United Kingdom has ever seen. And you know why? Because for 50 years, more than 50 years, he served Billy Graham. Behind the scenes, always serving the gospel, getting no glory. You haven't heard of him. He didn't seek glory. He was a very humble man, a very loving man. In fact, he is the reason we're here in Living Hope, because he took time to send a letter on our behalf to one of the elders of Port St. Mary Baptist Church, introducing us and saying we're not really that bad. And he served children for 70 years, unsaved and Christian children on sailing boats. He took them sailing. And when he died, I believe he heard those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," because he ran his race to the end through good and difficult times. Can we run our race to the end? You know, God's blessing is in the despite, not the because.